Welcome back to Moments That Matter. Today our guest is 20-something Lauren Schaupp. Lauren is the daughter of missionaries who grew up in Kenya and Ethiopia. She attended Southern Wesleyan University majoring in biology, and she is, shall we say, an outdoors person, as you will hear. Welcome, Lauren. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We will primarily be talking today about your very recent experience hiking the Appalachian Trail. But I want to start by hearing from you about your growing up because you had some amazing experiences at a relatively young age. Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent a lot of my early childhood in Kenya. My dad worked for an organization that primarily worked with Somali people who were refugees from Somalia. And my mom was a teacher. And I just have a very vivid memories of growing up with the missionary community in Kenya, specifically in Nairobi, visiting other families outside of the city, having just really life-changing experiences at a young age, growing up with mostly Kenyan playmates, mostly Kenyan friends, and just kind of having a worldview that was expanded just from a pretty early start. And then we moved back to Central between the years of like 7 and 13 or so. And then we moved to Ethiopia with Samaritan's Purse. And I went to an international school there. And again, really fundamentally shifting a lot of my worldview just with having friends from different countries and different religions and different backgrounds. And getting to know them on a really deep level really impacted the way that I started to view other people and the way that I started to view Christianity as a whole versus like what a lot of my other friends believed, whether that was Buddhism or Islam. So it was just really a pretty intensive, if you will, experience. But at the same time, it was something that I wouldn't trade for the world. So.
And then your family moved back to the upstate of South Carolina for your father's work, and you wound up attending Southern Wesleyan, and you decided to major in biology. Did you have in mind some particular use for that biology major?
I did. So I had gone with my dad on a work trip in Ethiopia, and I remember seeing a lot of pregnant women and babies who were just in really unhealthy, malnourished states. And I decided, you know what, I want to be a midwife. I want to do midwifery overseas because that's really necessary and needed. So I decided to study biology at SWU with the intent of then going in and getting my midwifery apprenticeship and kind of continuing on that path. But my senior year of college at SWU, I went and did an internship in the Republic of Congo at a small little missions hospital in the middle of nowhere. And I witnessed several pretty high intensity, high stress births in a situation that I probably would have wanted to be in eventually. And I just realized that was absolutely not what I was supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. So I graduated with a biology degree, but I am not pursuing the midwifery track any longer. So I'm not quite sure where that's going to lead me, but as of right now, I'm kind of free floating with that. So.
Okay. And you love getting into the outdoors and exploring. Did that come from your time in Africa?
I think in part it did. We didn't really have, well, I don't think it was really because I lived in Africa. I think it was because my parents were pretty adamant that I get outside and explore and play. So I very distinctly remember being locked out of the house for hours on end so that I could be outside and explore. And I don't know that they necessarily realized that it would then lead to me through hiking a trail, but I remember spending hours upon hours outside in the gardens in Kenya and in Ethiopia, playing games with friends, making up all sorts of games and make believe. And then even coming back to the States, we had full reign of the forest behind our house. And we built so many forts and had so much fun building dams in the creek and teepees. And I mean, we had a blast. So it was one of those things that I think it became ingrained in me because my parents forced us outside, regardless of where we were. So.
Mm-hmm. So you have been a ropes course facilitator in college and a zipline guide in the Smoky Mountains, but now you've accomplished something that many have only dreamed of, which is hiking the entire Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia. How did you decide to do that, and how long did it take you to finish it?
Yeah, so the Appalachian Trail has been a dream of mine since high school, which is funny because I didn't actually start backpacking until college, but for whatever reason in high school, I just decided I'd heard about it and I decided this is something I want to do. I think the challenge of it really intrigued me. The fact that people go and live outside and hike for 6 months was something that I'd not really ever heard of or knew of anybody who had done it. And I am a pretty competitive person. And so I like to challenge myself to do things that other people maybe haven't done. So I think that played into it a lot. And I actually was planning on doing it this year, starting in March. And last year I had some changes happen at the job I was at, and it just felt like the right time to leave my job. And so I was talking about it with my family and, jokingly was like, yeah, I could hike the Appalachian Trail this year. And nobody thought it was a bad idea. And so last year, that was when it happened. So I started in beginning of July, and I ended 2 days before Christmas. So it took me about 5.5 months to do the whole thing.
That is amazing. So you decided to hike the AT alone, but as I understand, you were rarely alone. Can you tell our listeners about some of the folks you met on the trail?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing the trail alone, but again, you meet so many incredible people as you hike that you never really feel lonely. So I actually met a married couple the day before I started the trail. We were staying in the same hostel, and we kind of started going about the same pace the first week or so and just decided we like each other's company. And so we started hiking together and stayed together. And we did about 1,800 miles of the 2,200-mile trail together. And their trail names are Ketchup and Treebeard, or Grace and Dan, as they would be called in normal society. And they became very, very close family to me. So we still keep in contact. I have plans to go visit them. We have plans to hike other trails together. They are people that I would definitely have as like on my lifelong friends list, if you will. So I hiked with them for the majority of the time, and they were probably the people that I hiked with the most. But there were other people that I would hike with for a week at a time, a month at a time, that just become really, really close. So there was one gentleman that I hiked with named Tiny Ponies, or John, and he and I hiked together for probably about 3 weeks. And we just had so much fun talking about our lived experiences and his kids and just like where we had come from and how it had shaped us in different ways. And I think it was just one of those things that, I know he lives in Seattle, and if I ever went there, I would go visit him. Like you really form this bond with people in a much faster way than you would form a bond with someone in normal life, if you will, because you're doing the same thing with the same goal and mindset, and you're going through hard stuff together. And so everything that could be considered fluff is just stripped away. So it really makes you raw and vulnerable pretty fast with people around you.
So speaking of those kinds of things, what was the hardest part of the trail?
Whew. I think for me, the hardest part of the trail was dealing with like physical ailments, my body really rebelled against me pretty much the whole time. I was sick twice. There were days that I couldn't keep food down. There were days that I got a staph infection on trail. I had an eye infection. I had several other various infections. And yeah, my body was really just not happy that I decided that I wanted to hike for as long as I did. Miraculously, none of those things were trail ending for me. There were a lot of friends that I hiked with, including tiny ponies who had to get off for ailments or injuries. And so I was really, really blessed to not have to do that. But it definitely made it difficult to have to think about, okay, what's my body doing now? Like, do I need to take antibiotics? Do I need to get off trail? How do I keep the area that's infected clean while I'm hiking? And it just added this whole other layer that I didn't really want to deal with. But I mean, it was also one of those things that taught me just how much I could push my body and it would keep going. So even sick, I could still hike 20 miles in a day. And as terrible as it felt, it was doable. And so I think it really helped me kind of learn, like, what are my body's boundaries? What can I do versus what should I do? And how does that play out even now in like returning to a normal like life? How does that play out with my mentality of pushing myself further and versus like knowing when to stop? So.
And you mentioned to me an unexpected difficulty of hiking in the fall, which was the leaves on the trail. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I actually was so excited to be following the fall as we hiked through Virginia and the southern part of the trail. We had gorgeous fall colors and leaves, but what we didn't realize would happen is that when the leaves fell, they fell. And so there were days that it was just days upon days upon days of just wading through knee-deep leaves. And so you can't hear yourself think, you can't hold a conversation with other people around you. And most of the time you can't see the trail at all because it's just covered in a blanket of leaves. And so at that point, we had started night hiking quite a bit. And so there were a lot of the time, it was just hoping that you were on the trail and you were following blazes on the tree. So the little white strips of paint that kind of marked the trail. But those were only every few hundred feet. So there were stretches of trail that you wouldn't see a blaze and you would just hope, well, this feels like it could be the trail. And you wanted to make sure, that you didn't turn your ankle on the rocks underneath because there would be loose rock or an unexpected root or something, and you couldn't see it because of the roots or because of the leaves. So it definitely made it really challenging in a way that I did not expect. And by the time that winter rolled around and the leaves had started to kind of like stop falling, I guess, I was so glad to not have to deal with leaves anymore.
So what was it that surprised you about the trail?
I think I was very surprised about how mental it was. I knew going into it that it was going to be a physical challenge and a mental challenge. I didn't expect it to be as mentally challenging as it was. I think there were days that it really was just a push of, I just have to do a mile, and then you do that mile and I just have to do the next mile. And it wasn't even that your body couldn't do it. It was that your mind had to just continue to remind itself, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm here because I want to finish the trail. And it really didn't hit me that we were almost done until we were in Georgia, a day away from the end of the trail. Because for months and months and months, you're just thinking, okay, just got to get to Georgia, just got to get to Georgia. And then you get to Georgia and you're like, wait, but I'm here. This doesn't feel right. I shouldn't be here yet. So it's this weird balance of trying to enjoy and be present in every moment that you have, but also focusing on what your ultimate goal is of finishing the trail. And that was a balance that was kind of hard to maintain a lot of days, especially on the days that were just rough, whether it was bad weather or feeling ill or whatever. Those were the days that it was like, oh, I just have to get through this. And sometimes it was that way and I did just get through it. And other times it was like, oh, I wish I had like really been more present in that, because I met some cool people and I just didn't even think to, like, I wasn't in a mindset where I could be fully present and engage.
Would you suggest hiking the AT to others? And along with that, what kind of person do you think it takes to not only hike some part of the trail, but and lots of people have done that, but to actually hike the entire AT?
I think that I would recommend hiking it to others. I think it takes a certain kind of person to want to hike the AT. I think that anyone can hike the trail. To me, that's not the issue. The issue is whether or not you want to do it. If there's even a slight part of you that's like, no, I don't really want to, it's going to be very, very difficult to finish. So I would say, if it is something that you dreamed of doing or you want to do, absolutely do it. I met so many people who were in their 70s and 80s who were through hiking the trail. I met people with disabilities who were hiking the trail. I met a man with fibromyalgia who was hiking the trail, a man who had a leg amputation who was hiking the trail. I mean, it doesn't matter the condition of your body, but I think mentally you have to really want it to do it. That would be probably what I would say about doing it. But if you want to do it, absolutely, 100%, I recommend it. I think kind of going along with that, like, the mentality is really what I would say is the most important part of hiking any trail, whether that's a part of the AT, but also the entirety of it. So a lot of people who maybe can't afford to do a 6-month section hike, whether because of time or kids or jobs, they do sections. And so instead of a through hike, they do sections. And so there were several people I met out on trail who had been slowly chipping away at doing the AT for 20 plus years, and they were almost done, or they were finishing that day or something like that. And that's just as impressive, if not more so, to me, because the amount of dedication and time and planning and money that goes into section hiking year after year after year, to me, that shows the mentality of, I want to do this. I want to do the whole trail. It's just a different way of doing it. And so I think really, ultimately, if you don't want to do it, or you don't think, if you're just doing it on a whim, it's going to be really hard for you to finish the trail.
And for the benefit of our listeners who may not know, end to end, how long is this trail?
This year, it was 2,193 miles and 0.1. This coming year, it's going to be 2,191 miles, 0.3. So it shifts every year just based on reroutes or things that change. About 2,200 miles.
Wow. And as I understand from you, that's not even the longest trail in the U.S.
It is not. There are several longer trails. The Pacific Crest Trail is one that's very well known. It's Mexico to Canada, and that one's about 2,600 miles. And then the Continental Divide Trail, also Mexico to Canada, but more through Colorado and Wyoming, is 3,050 miles. And then there's a new trail called the All-American Rail Trail, which is from Washington, D.C. to Washington State. And that one, I think, is about 4,500 miles, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so there are definitely some longer ones. And my goal is to do them. So especially the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. So
what is your next adventure?
Well, for the next few years, my adventures are going to stay more around the area, I think. doing a lot of the smaller backpacking trails around here, whether that's the Foothills Trail or the Art Loeb Trail. But eventually, probably in 2023, my goal is to do the Continental Divide Trail. And then in 2025, do the Pacific Crest Trail. Once I complete those two, along with the Appalachian Trail, it's considered a triple crown. And there's maybe 150 people who have ever triple crowned. So it's my goal to do that.
Wow. It's starting to sound like Everest.
Yeah.
Well, that's extremely impressive. And, especially for a person such as myself, who is actually an indoorist as opposed to an outdoorist, you have my undying respect, believe me. And I just appreciate, that hearing this kind of perspective. And I think our listeners will appreciate it as well. And maybe even it will be motivating for someone. And
that'd be amazing.
I guess one other thing that I should ask is your preparation for the AT, because you didn't just wake up one day and just, okay, here we go. And so what would be wise in terms of preparation if somebody is serious about that?
Absolutely. So because I had been dreaming of doing the AT for years, I had slowly been accumulating gear. I had been watching YouTube videos, reading books. But doing that, there is a part of it where you just kind of have to learn as you go. So there are books that I can recommend, such as Becoming Odessa, a book called How to Hike the Appalachian Trail by Chris Cage. There's several others in there as well. I would not recommend Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods as preparation, because it's more for comedic effect rather than an actual how to hike the Appalachian Trail. There are so many videos and blogs and YouTube people who talk about how they did their through hike, what gear they used. Outdoor Gear Lab is a great resource for gear comparison. And then I would say also physical preparation, you definitely want to be in decent shape. I would say, it's hard to say because I was hiking with several marathoners and the trail just absolutely nailed them as much as it did me. And so it's just a totally different game. I wouldn't say, oh, you should be able to run 2 miles or anything like that. But I will say as much cardio as you can do is beneficial, because that's pretty much what you're doing, is a lot of cardio. So I think with that, it's very much a kind of the trail trains you as you go. But yeah, I think a lot of the preparation comes with doing it. There were so many pieces of gear that I thought, yes, this is what I have. This is perfect. This is what I need. I've narrowed it down. This is exactly it. And then within the first 100 miles, I was like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. What am I doing? I have no idea what I'm doing. And I got rid of probably about 15 pounds worth out of my bag, just of gear that I didn't need, that I was so convinced that I did based on the research that I'd done. And there were things that other people carried that I didn't, or I carried that they didn't, based on what I wanted versus what they wanted as far as experience goes. So it really varies. And some of it really does not happen until you actually do the trail. But again, there's so many resources out there and the trail is so accessible. The first trail town that you'll hit in Maine, if you go south, is 100 miles in. And the first trail town or outfitter that you hit going north is 30 miles in. And you walk right through it going north, and they will help you. Both places will help you take apart your gear and think about what you need and what you don't. And they do that for a living because there are so many people who do the trail and want to do it. So again, I think the preparation can be key, especially for someone like me who is a planner. But there were a lot of people on trail that I met who were like, yeah, I just decided 2 weeks ago to do it. And here I am. which stresses me out completely. But for them, it worked. And yeah, so I think a lot of it depends too on your level and comfortability with backpacking. Are you comfortable backpacking alone? If not, you're going to get comfortable backpacking alone very quickly. So yeah, I think a lot of it is just finding sources on the internet or on YouTube or books and prepping as much as you can or as much as you feel comfortable doing. But I think my warning, I guess, with that, or my caveat is, for me, it became a safety net to prep and plan and be like, well, I'm not ready yet because I haven't finished fully preparing. And you're never going to be fully prepared to ever do a trail, ever. It's like having a baby. You're never fully prepared to have children, but you do it and you learn along the way, and it's gonna be great. So I think the trail is the same way. There's a certain jumping off point that you hit that you have to just do it.
An awesome life lesson. Well, thanks so much for being our guest today, Lauren, and thank you, kind listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We hope you'll tune in to Moments That Matter next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.